Welcome to another episode of Roundtable Mondays. Sorry if I just got you in. Sorry. Welcome again to another episode of Roundtable Mondays. We have a very, very special topic and a very, very special panel this evening. I believe we may have one more person that joins us, so just giving you a heads up. But let's go ahead and introduce our panel first before we get into the topic. I'm your host, Compton Jay, for this episode. Right next to me, next to me, I'm not going to say which way, but right next to me, a fellow FHL member, Kamali. How you doing, sir?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me on here today as well.
Absolutely.
Glad to be here among such great folks.
Absolutely. Just for those that don't know, you may be muted. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you that, Kamali. Nick, co-founder, FHL member. Nick, I'm glad to have you here. I couldn't imagine this particular conversation without you. How you doing, sir?
We are going to make a lot of class reductionists uncomfortable in this conversation. Yes. That's the intent. So
right,
we got the lineup to do it, but
right. Now, I'm going to go to the center of the screen, and I think it's kind of fitting that the center of the screen is our only female, and that is Angelique. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great.
Great. Thank you for coming. And right below her, we have Logan. Logan he has, several hats. I'll let him talk about that on his own. But Logan, how are you doing, sir?
I am well. I'm really glad to be here and talking about this with all of these excellent people. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now, just before I introduce the last two guests, the last two panelists who just introduced themselves were selected in particular because I like their frankness in discussion, and I think this particular discussion needs frank talk. So that's the reason why these two I felt were right for this conversation. And now let's go to who we're going to say is our professionals on the panel in this particular field, or at least has studied this field, and that is Professor Anthony Zunkas. I always want to make sure I said the last name right. How are you doing? Hold on. Let me unmute you. There you go.
I'm doing great, and basically I'll respond to anything you call me. So yeah, you have that privilege. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here with everybody. Really honored.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, we have a regular panelist on the International Left Coalition. Great wisdom. This is Kareem. How are you doing, Kareem?
Yeah, doing fine. Great to be with you all, and looking forward to this this talk.
Okay. And Kareem, can you let everybody know where you are broadcasting from? What country you're in?
I'm currently in Hong Kong. I work as a professor at the University of Hong Kong, and so I'm actually early in the morning usually when I talk to you guys, while you guys are in the evening. So yes. If I look a bit sleepy, sometimes you understand why.
Awesome, because I would definitely look sleepy at 8 a.m. Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we have a great panel, Nick and Kamali, and the topic is racial trauma, or under the broader topic of the trauma from oppression, and the American experience is very traumatic. So we wanted to discuss just the trauma that stems from oppression, and in particular, racial trauma. Now, before we dive into the discussion, I do want to play a short video that kind of sets the tone for the conversation. I believe it is very relevant to the topic. So let's go ahead and roll this. I believe I'm sharing sound. If anybody in the notes, if there's any issues, please let us know in the notes or in the comments. Here is that video.
Tonight, a country emerging from protests of pain. After the killing of George Floyd,
I cannot breathe.
Viral moments of racial bias caught on tape.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
and the deadly shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. Incidents that are not just emotionally devastating, but also physically damaging to Black people.
Every police shooting of an unarmed Black person leads to worse mental health for the entire Black population in the state in which it occurred for the next 3 months.
Several studies show a possible association between perceived discrimination and mental and physical health. One study found that Black people who were stopped several times by police were 3 times more likely to exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and high levels of anxiety and stress. We had a candid discussion about the toll those experiences can take.
Here we are again seeing Black people, Black men especially, being killed in public. It's a spectacle.
Do you feel exhausted by the headlines?
It's an exhaustion that should not be seen as an exaggeration. It's an exhaustion that should be seen as justified, and that there is a real and a true understanding of why it's there.
That exhaustion, the byproduct of racism that dates back centuries, from slavery to Jim Crow segregation. It's a history of oppression that still impacts Black communities today, especially when images of brutality serve as a reminder.
How does that stress manifest? What does that mean for the Black people in this country who are watching those videos?
It means that they have higher levels of mental health symptoms. It means they have more difficulty sleeping at night. It means that some of their biological systems are not functioning the way that they should.
Causing a collective pain, but behind it, there's still hope.
Moving forward, I think we can continue to tell the truth, and hopefully America looks at itself and doesn't like what it sees.
We have to make sure that Black people, Black babies, Black children are protected.
Hope for a better future and a healthier one. Morgan Radford.
All right, so I think that kind of speaks to, I was surprised to find that on corporate media. It actually, on a surface level, speaks to how oppression, the treatment of the Black community, in particular, we're talking about that, but this also applies to indigenous communities. This also applies to brown communities. So, but the trauma from just your existence, the different streams of trauma from the police, from poverty and the conditions of poverty, always wondered, like, how does that affect a person having living a lifetime in continuous poverty, feeling like you can never get ahead, internalizing that to yourself instead of, understanding the system and what's happening to you. And I think it's very, being honest, I don't necessarily know if every Black person or person of color understands we're still being oppressed. I don't necessarily, because I don't feel like the Black community as a whole talks about it in terms of oppression. It's just, this thing happened bad, but you're looking at it separately instead of putting the pieces together to understand it works all together. So, and now I'm gonna say this one last thing before I pass it to the panel for just initial thoughts about this topic. What switched my whole thinking was a traumatic experience that happened to me where my cousin was murdered maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And it just clicked to me that how I wanted to approach what I do at FHL is approach it from the point of view of trauma. So you can attack the duopoly from the point of view of trauma, from saying your decision to, not cover everybody in health impacts these amount of people, these people die. What happens to the mental health of those people who died, the survivors of the person who died? Like, how does that affect? So that's what I mean by addressing it from a different way, because I feel like I can reach more people in that way. But I do want to start with the first question is just simply, do you believe one, racial trauma exists? That's a thing. And do you believe the Black community as a whole understands the level of trauma that they're currently under? Like, Black people as a culture, we don't really, oh, let's go to a doctor, let's go see a therapist. We just kind of take the trauma. It's a tradition of slavery. We just kind of take the trauma. You didn't have time. You know what I mean? You couldn't take the time to mourn, for example, if your son was sold away. You had to get back into the fields. So you just had to pack the trauma on and continue moving. So I think that's the tradition of the Black community. So the question is, do you think the Black community as a whole understands the level of trauma that they're under? So you can speak to it as from a personal level if you understand, or if you just want to speak to it as holistically, or if you want to speak to it. No, let's just leave those two options. Let's just leave those two options. So let's start with Angelique. What do you believe? What's your response to that?
My response to that is, I think as a people, as Black people, we do understand it. We understand it. We, just because we pack it on and just like, okay, here's another thing, here's another thing, here's another thing that's on our backs. And we just take it in and we take it in and we take it in, doesn't mean we don't understand it. We understand it. We understand that it's oppression. I think that we understand as a whole that we understand that it is oppression. I don't think the dominant society understands that it's oppression, nor do they care that it's oppression. But as a people, we understand it's oppression. I believe so, in my opinion.
I want to kind of piggyback on that, what you just said, the dominant culture. So you're saying white America doesn't believe we're under oppression. Even when I mean, I know that's true, but just hearing it is mind blowing how you can see what's happening and not understand that that's what's happening. What do you think that is? Do you think it's willful ignorance, or do you believe it's and I'm going to use this term Overton window to describe racial understanding racism. I know it applies to, but do you think the Overton window, when we're talking racism, has been shifted so much that, things that would normally be considered racist or oppression, they just don't see it as that. They just see it as Black people making as a whole bad decisions. Like, so I guess the question is, what do you believe, Angelique? What do you believe white America, what do you believe they think is happening to Black people? Why are Black people are always at the bottom of every single category? Like, what do you believe they think if they don't think it's oppression exists?
I just think they just think that the dominant society, they just believe that we're just bad. We're just bad. And we deserve what's coming to us. It's our own personal behavior. It's our own personal actions. So they may understand it to be oppression. I'm not sure. I know that they don't care that it is. And that it's our fault. It's our fault. It's Black people's fault. If you all weren't bad, if you all just acted right, you wouldn't have all these problems. That's what I think. That's what I believe, in my opinion.
So let me bring Nick in here. Nick, you heard what Angelique said. I was originally come to you at the end, but in that particular comment, I kind of wanted to get what you thought about what she's saying here about, do you think the dominant culture, white America, has any interest? I think I did another episode on this. Has any interest in understanding Black pain, or even knowing that it exists? Or the police state, for example, is put there in our communities to stop the symptoms of oppression, like crime, from bubbling up for white America to see it. So it's like, you know, it's like out of sight, out of mind. You get what I'm saying, Nick?
Yes, CJ. Why do you think so many white Americans are still attached to the idea of giant police budgets? So, if you ask a lot of these people, do you think we should legalize marijuana? Do you think we should end the drug war? They will agree with you on that concept. If you ask a lot, right? So if you want to end the drug war, why do you still want to keep the giant police budgets that blew up because of the drug war? So they can't justify their giant police budgets, and I dare them to do so. I wrote a giant op-ed daring them to debunk my points, because people who advocate for giant police budgets are deeply unserious people. Why do I bring this up? We know what reduces crime. And if you invest in housing, education, and increasing the standard of living for the populace, that reduces crime. So now, the reason I'm bringing this up, because Angelic said something amazing there, where she said they don't think we can actually, they think we're deplorables at the end of the day, for lack of a better term. So their thought process is we still have to invest in a lot of giant police budget, even though it does not reduce crime. We got to invest in that instead of housing, education, healthcare, and increased wages. Because even this is their mindset, even if they won't admit it, this is subconscious. Even if we give you those things, it's still not going to change your crime.
Right. I never looked at it. That's mind blowing. I never looked at it that way, Nick. They feel like even if we do that, because you're black, because you're born this way, you're still going to do that.
Now, as an abolitionist, I believe that if you provide for people and you have a functioning society, which capitalism inherently cannot provide, that's why we need a fascist police state under capitalism. But if you had a society where you actually take care of people, because I know my people are inherently good, and I know my people, if taken care of, will actually create a decent society where we take care of each other. I believe in these things. That's why I'm an abolitionist, because we invest in those things. The crime would decrease naturally. That's why it's a process. That's why it's a road abolition, because if you defund the police, the crime rate will go down naturally. Because once you start providing for people, once the crime rate drops down, what's the point of having the police then? So that's me believing that as abolition. Once you provide for people, they're better. But the people who are advocates of neoliberalism, the people on both sides, they don't believe people the disenfranchised community can improve. So they have to have. Go ahead, CJ. But
I'm just saying. So they believe a person could make $10,000 a month, and they're still going to go out and commit crime. They're still going to go out and do. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that the sort of thinking?
I'm gonna give an opportunity for someone else to jump in too, but I'm gonna end on here because they don't see the connection between class and race. So when they just look at look at the crime rates of this community, and they don't understand that our wealth have been tanked because of the white supremacist system that has stolen our wealth. Civil asset forfeiture impacts our community at about 60% rate. And one thing I wanted to get into, which that clip you played hinted towards, and I want to expand on this more, because this is something I learned as I became class conscious, and once I understand that class equals race. Once you understand that there's an entire myth of the absent black father, right? The idea that the black father is not there, that there's somehow that we are genetically disposed to being fathers who do not care about providing for our children. Now, if you look at the results of our society, the neoliberal policy, this is easy to explain. For one, the new Jim Crow locked us up. Secondly, late stage capitalism demanded our labor in like, for example, I had parents that had to work 2 jobs, and I know my father had worked 50, 60 hours a week. He would have loved to be there, but he can't, because he don't have the vacation time that a lot of family that got generational wealth. Like, if you're in a suburbanite career path, you can take vacation time. You got 40 hours a week you work. You know, you got 2 weeks you can take off. You know what I mean? But our family, they can't do that. So they either overwork or they criminalize in a way that is disproportionate to our community due to broken windows policing. But I can go out there on this. I got much more to add. I'm gonna get to the panel.
Let me bring in Anthony, and only because you asked me to call you that before. So Professor Anthony, I want to bring you in here because you and I actually had a conversation about this actual topic before, so I won't set you up with anything because I heard you saw you nodding your head with a lot has been said. So I'm gonna leave it open for you to make your comment on basically the basic question, and then any of the follow-up questions or any of the comments that anybody has said. What say you on this part right here?
Okay, and the first thing I want to do is just acknowledge that I'm a white male. If I say anything stupid, please feel free to gently push back and correct me, all right? Because that can happen, right? So I think about my field of social work, right? We, work in the mental health field. When we look at things like trauma is anything that overwhelms, a simple definition would be anything that overwhelms our coping mechanisms, our ability to cope. And that could be a singular event, like a horrible car accident, or it could be, and what's worse is when it's cumulative. So we talk about racial trauma. It's not a one-day thing. It's something that somebody lives with their entire lives. And I think one of the biggest problems, and Angelique mentioned this, and how the white community lies to itself and to others about the quote-unquote problem in Black communities. One of the tools they use, in addition to a criminally unjust criminal justice system, is they use the fields of psychology, psychiatry, and medicine to defect people, right? To tell people that there's something wrong with them internally and individually. There's something actually in the DSM, which is like the book that psychologists and psychiatrists and social works use to understand, quote unquote, what we call mental disorders. And there's something called adjustment disorder, right? I remember Krishnamurti said this: it is of no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. What we do criminally through the fields of psychology and psychiatry is we convince victims that they are defective and sick and ill, and that there's something wrong with them. So if you have rage, well, that's something wrong with you. We'll give you a pill for that. I worked in a mostly Black community on Long Island at a mental health clinic, and I was told on day one, every kid, because we counseled mostly children and adolescents, every kid gets a diagnosis, every kid gets a pill. From a very young age, Black children in this country are looked at as defective. And I believe it absolutely profoundly affects their view of themselves in context of the world around them. But that brainwashing, those lies, affect people in my field. And I think my work in teaching is trying to liberate this idea, this lie, that there's something wrong with people who are oppressed because they act in certain ways. Mental illness, physical illness, even what we call criminal behavior and violent behavior, right? Because we only call certain things criminal and violent. And those things, right? Yeah. So those things are looked at as defective behaviors because there's something wrong inside of that person. And even a nice person might say, well, it's their genes. Their genes are defective. First of all, that's not true, right? The social environment makes us who we are. How can we strangle people throughout their lives with chains and then complain when they act in ways that aren't what we consider to be pro-social? If any white people that were treated this way, we would be talking about it nonstop and being rageful all the time. So I look at psychology, psychiatry, and also education as a field that defectivizes, I just made that word up, individuals, especially young Black children and teens. Black girls are looked at as having anger problems. And, you know, I worked in schools, I've worked in clinics, I heard this all the time. And I think that that's part of it. And what we're not talking about is, well, why are these behaviors there? Because people are being traumatized.
Right. Right. But a follow-up question to that, and I'll bring in Kareem for this, a follow-up question to that is, if we are being, how can I put this? If we're being denied even the ability to be diagnosed as, hey, this is not me. Like, I am traumatized by something other than myself. And you internalize that has to be like a lifelong, like you're saying, that has to be a lifelong, like, view of yourself. So what I'm getting at is that a lot of these traumas, racial traumas, because it's your skin is something you can't get out of, it's lifelong, or it's at least a feeling that is lifelong. That has to have a sense of despair. That has to give you a sense of despair that, hey, I can't get out of my skin, but I keep getting treated like this because of my skin. And it's nothing I can do about it. I can't change said mind. I can't change their mind. I can't change their mind. Like, that has to have a sense of despair. So I do want to bring in Kareem. Now, same sort of setup. I don't want to set you up with a question, but just off of what you've been hearing in the discussion, what is your take? What is your comment, or what do you want to say at this point?
Yeah, so I heard many really good things, and I think Anthony and me would really find each other with regards to our academic viewpoints. I am a psychologist, actually. I would say a cultural psychologist, and the critiques that Anthony just said are the critiques that I have literally put in writing and published in psychology journals. Actually, that we have a very big problem individualizing, or as we call that methodological individualism in psychology, where we actually consider acts of racism and the perception of racism as something that is within the individual. So if somebody does a racist act, it's because that is a racist individual. And also, when you see or when you perceive things as racism, like microaggressions, it's often being, you can almost say, pathologized by saying, oh, but you're paranoid, you see things. Okay, so that's also being individualized. Now let me give you an example. I remember as a small kid, when I was let's say 4 or 5 years old, I remember as a kid always looking at Hollywood movies and asking my mom, why do bad guys always look like my dad? Okay, my dad is Arabic, and bad guys would always look like my dad or the family of my dad. Why am I using this example? Because this is so important in relation to what CJ just said. That it's not an individual case of racism, that racism is not individual, but that it's a system of oppression. And that system is everywhere, whether we talk about movies, whether we talk about education, whether it's about watching the news. That system of racism is cultural and it's global. It's everywhere. White supremacy is everywhere. I've lived everywhere, and it doesn't matter if you go to Asia, it doesn't matter if you go to Africa, Latin America. White supremacy is everywhere. It's a cultural system, and every day, people of color, whether you're Middle Eastern, whether you're Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, doesn't matter. Every day in that system, that cultural system, you are conditioned with your own inferiority. Okay, you watch movies, the way people interact with you on the streets, the way they talk about you in the news. Every day you are conditioned with your own inferiority. And like Anthony just said, it's cumulative, because you have to deal with microaggressions. You have to deal with the way people treat you. You have to deal with the news about your people, Black people dying on the streets. So we have a system, and I always say it's culture. We have a cultural system that dehumanizes people of color, which justifies harming them. And Angelica, or is it Angelic? I don't know exactly, but she said
Angelique, yeah.
Angelique. Oh, Angelique, sorry. Yeah. Angelique said something very good, and that is that the dominant society often denies our experience, and in your case, Black experience in the United States, because let's be very direct here, because it maintains the status quo. And the status quo is, like CJ just said, is willful ignorance. Maintaining the status quo can be achieved through willful ignorance, because it's a system that privileges a lot of people, and that privilege is kind of addictive as well.
What stands out to me, Kareem, and what you said, one of the points is individualizing racism. Like when they say, have you ever experienced racism? That should be a question that's answered every single day of my life. But people, black people, people of color, indigenous, feel like they have to have a story. A cop put me over. No. What you're describing, Kareem, is that the inferiority complex. It's not a coincidence. In rap music, for example, was glorified in black men, light-skinned woman, a light skin. Where does that come from? Why do you think that's there? Good hair, the concept of good hair, still here. Look at TV today, the roles that are cast. Black families, look at the black families. Why are all the roles cast where the person is of mixed race? The female in particular. So what he's talking about.
We all remember what happened to Aunt Viv.
Yeah, exactly. And so Kareem, when you were saying this, I was just going through like, yes, this is what I'm saying. This is why I have to have conversations with my daughters about their hair. And saying, what you're seeing is this. This is why I have to do that. I just had that conversation with my middle daughter a couple of weeks ago. So I get that. So I do want to bring in Logan, since I'm not giving anybody sort of a setup, because I feel like the conversation have evolved to a better place than the original question. I'll just let you take what you got from it and give us what you think. What are your thoughts on what's going on or what we're talking about here?
Okay, I really am enjoying what people have to say, and I really resonate with basically all of it. One of the most important features of racism and racial trauma is that gaslighting. Essentially, race itself, right? Like when people say that race isn't real, that's true. It's not a thing, right? It's not like, there is no science behind, being black or being white, like, nothing like blood type doesn't match up to it. Nothing, right? So we have to be lied to constantly to maintain what to me is a mythology of race, right? And that mythology is there to prop up racialized capitalism, right? So it has to consistently be fed to us, and it's like, a constant system of trauma, because we know we're being lied to. We know that none of the stuff that's being said about us is true, right? And also you begin to internalize some of the stuff that you hear. And it takes unlearning, even when you know that there's nothing defective about you as a black person. You know that your mind works just fine. You know that, your spirit, that your sense of goodness is just fine, but you keep seeing all these images, right? And when we talk about rap music, like, I always like to remember that, keep in mind who controls what gets popular, right? Who is putting the money behind certain kinds of music as opposed to other kinds of music? Well, okay, right? Like, some of it speaks to the experience that people are having in black communities, but there's lots of things that speak to those experiences. You know what I mean? The movies that become popular. And it's not that those things aren't great. Those pieces of artwork aren't great, but it's a small part of our experience, right? Just coming of age stories, just like, a story where a person just has a love story that has nothing to do with race, except for obviously everything is racialized. So whatever, to leave that out would be, but you know where I'm going with that,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So like the hardest part of all of this is that there's no fact behind it, but we still have to live under it and fight to basically say, like, not only am I, like, I'm a human, right? And I'm black, but that is like the least interesting thing about me, but it's the only thing that you see. And it's the only thing that I get to talk about my experience, because that is the world that's the world that I live in, and keep in mind that these things are, that all identities are intersectional. So these are things that are experienced in a number of ways, right? Because you can't divorce blackness from being a woman, from being trans, from whatever your other identities are. It all lines up. You can't separate these things, right? And so we, even as a community, in some ways, we traumatize ourselves. And like, just to call out like cis Black men for a second, like that adjacency to the white power structure, right, where you're only one step removed, sometimes causes cis Black men to help oppression in a lot of ways, and wealthy Black people, right? Like billionaire Black people are not helping us in the way that they could because they've become wealthy people. They have adopted capitalism, right? They have adopted the overculture that's killing us all, right? So, I mean, I think it's just really important to remember that none of this is true. You have to like, and you have to remember to disbelieve all of the bullshit that has been told to you and that is being constantly said about you, like, you know, the myth of criminality, right? Of course, if you put all the cops in certain neighborhoods, there's going to be more crime reported, right? It's just logic. And the safest neighborhoods, guess what, are the ones that don't have cops. And we all know this to be true. It's the most obvious thing in the world, right? But we get lied to so much that even Black people end up voting for cops. Right. Because, I mean, and look, it's terrifying to live in a crime-ridden area, right? Of course it is. And you may not know what to do. But I think, you know, well, let me not get too far afield. I'm gonna take it to someone else because I will go on.
I want to add to something that Logan said here, because it's very profound and people need to understand this. What defines a crime? And now, what the thing that is defining a crime is a white supremacist capitalist system, right? So we have institutions, law enforcement institutions, that openly admit that they don't spend time going after white collar criminals. The reason why they don't do that because they spend a lot of resources and they had to fight an army of lawyers in order to do so. So they figure it's actually better. Like, well, let's just pad our numbers by going after a bunch of poor people who can only have public defense. Now, once again, who are the people that are most likely impacted by this? Because we talk about race here. So when we say racist class, this is the kind of stuff we are talking about. When we talk about broken windows policing and the fact that they impose regressive taxes and fees on our class while they leave white collar crime untouched because it costs too much to go after. Now, that also applies to the question, what is crime? Because the people that want to say my community is violent, it's not my community that is selling weapons to countries that are complicit in genocide. It's not our community that are locking up kids in cages and sexually assaulting them at the border. So you see how they don't define that as a violent act? You see how they don't define bombing villages and having torture programs in the global south? Why is that not a crime? But someone selling a dime bag? You want to break that part down?
Let's get. No, I was going to say, let's bring in Kamali. He did not have a chance yet to chime in on the initial comments. What, Kamali, just based on, you know, everything you've hearing, I've seen you, you know, kind of shake your head in agreement several times throughout. What would you like to contribute at this juncture right here, sir?
Well, it's very hard to add much to what's already been said because I feel like, you know, much of it has been covered so well by everyone here, and I haven't heard anything that I disagree with thus far. And so I will say, you know, one to Angelique's point about and to Nick's point about the dominant culture and really the folks that view us as deplorables. I think that one thing is that a lot of liberal white folks will hear that and will think that they are not a part of that group. Well, they'll hear, okay, well, some people are just racist and they are, they view us as deplorables, and they'll say, well, not me. I got the Black Lives Matter sticker on my, on my banner, on my Twitter profile. Like one white woman responded to Nick on Twitter that she's got her dog's handkerchief said Black Lives Matter. How could she be racist? So I think that a lot of white liberal folks that are these Joe Biden voters, this type will hear this and will say, okay, well, I'm not one of those folks, right? And of course, there are the conservatives, the anti-CRT folks, the folks that are overt racist. It's very easy to point them out and to say they're a problem, and they are obviously a problem, and they've obviously contributed to racial trauma over decades and centuries. But I think that this is what sort of Martin Luther King was speaking to in his famous speech when he talked about in his letter from Birmingham jail, where he talked about that the greatest stumbling block to the Negro is not the white Ku Klux Klan man, but the white moderate, right? And it's because these white liberal folks, listen, we are not giving a pass to the conservatives, to the overt racists. That's obvious, all right? What we need to what we have to do, and what white liberals still have to unpack, is why is it that, like Nick said, like Angelique said, they still don't support measures to you say something like defund police, and I heard it from every which way, or abolish police, and you'll hear it from every which way. Oh, that's too harsh. That rhetoric is too harsh. You can't talk about that. That's a bad slogan, and you have to stop and explain this to people too much. They want to maintain those institutions of white supremacy, not just out of the view of the fear of the Black person, but also of the fact that they feel protected by these institutions, right? Like Kareem said, they feel like they stand to benefit from these institutions. So one thing that is still left to unpack is, in a lot of these circles, a lot of people that I grew up with, people that I'm surrounded by they would say, well, I have plenty of Black friends. We grew up together, but they are the same ones that when the time comes to stand side by side and to stand up against these institutions of white supremacy, would rather to continue to vote for somebody like Joe Biden. That is the architect of the 1994 crime bill that has led to mass incarceration. The 1986 crime commission bill that put in those 1 to 100 rules of crack versus cocaine, because one we know is something that wealthier people could afford, and crack was something that Black people, could not, was the only thing that Black folks could afford. So one, we have to make sure that they are constantly, they've got a lot of work to continue to do, and that's going to have to happen within their own communities. I'm not one of these people that think that it's up to Black folks to continue to spend our time trying to educate these people, what I'm more concerned with is Black people starting to get together. And this isn't some sort of Black separatist or Black nationalist sort of perspective, but rather just Black self-determination, right? I'm reading this great book right now by Lorenzo Camboa Irvin, and it's called Anarchism and the Black Revolution. And what it really talks about is Black people getting together and self-determining amongst ourselves, right? We don't have to wait on the dominant society to get it right. If we wait, we might wait. If we continue to wait, we could wait till like James Baldwin said, it's around age 30 that for most Black people, when they take stock and they realize that it's not just the fact that you've grown up and you've dealt with all the racism from the police and from the banker and from the every institution, the teachers, every institution that you face. It's when you get to around age 30 and you realize it's not just that I've lived this and I've suffered this, but now I'm watching my nieces and my nephews suffer the same thing, and we're realizing that nothing that I've done to this point has changed the outcome for the next generation, and possibly nothing we can do is going to change that outcome for them, other than, I think, us getting together, starting to get together collectively and starting to work, within our communities, within Black communities, to start to build up those communities, through acts of, direct action, through, for me, I always advocate for things like developing worker cooperatives. I use Cooperation Jackson as a model for that, and what the work that they're doing. And so, and one other thing I'll just say is that, we often hear the word like underprivileged slung around. And I just think that word, it's yet another one of these passive words, right? Oh, well, these people are underprivileged. And it's just something that, it just sounds like something that just sort of a condition that just sort of came to be, right? These people just, oh, there they go. They just so happen to be underprivileged, right? But really, it's if somebody is underprivileged, you have to ask yourself, well, then who's overprivileged, right? That naturally, necessarily, designates that there is somebody that is overprivileged in this case. And so, and it's not through some passive sort of, thing. It's through these active, reproducing of these systems over and over. And it's not just we have to break it past just class, because even if it were just all poor poor Black folks and poor white folks, I think that we still, across class lines, we can certainly find solidarity. But I think that you'll find that even poor white folks will still uphold these same institutions of white supremacy for the simple fact that they still see it as them having a way out. At least they're not Black. At least there's somebody else there below them that they can step on the way up. And so we have to be careful, in trying to, always talk about things. I constantly rail on class, but let's not let poor white folks off the hook either, that there are plenty of steps that they have to start to take to do the work in their own communities, and not to expect Black people to sit here and provide this education for free and to do this work for them. We got to start to get together within our own communities and use that as a model and show them, listen, if you want to learn from us, take from us by observing and then bringing that back to your community, by all means do so. But please don't expect Black people to sit there and to constantly deal with them. I'm reading just in the comments, folks that are saying, well, I don't see race and things like that. And, and that's those same things that we have to hear over and over again. I was just, and I'll stop, because I've got plenty to say, and I could speak to my own personal experience with this sort of racial trauma. But just 2 years ago, I was hospitalized and I had to check into inpatient psychiatry. I was hospitalized for a week because I had first been arrested in my own home by white police. White people brought police to my home. I got arrested out of my home. I lost my housing. I lost my, lost access to my dog. It caused rupture in my relationship that ended a relationship that I had, a long-term relationship. I was then shortly after explaining that to my job, who helped me to get the mental health counseling that I got. These people that try to say, these were white liberals who want you to believe that they are out there doing the best for you and that they really believe the best for you, and recommended me, mental health professionals. They turned around, and then after knowing all of that had gone on in my life, and I was now dealing with the racist court system, they turned around because I was missing days of work, and then fired me and gaslit the fuck out of me, like Logan said, the gaslighting, and gaslit me and tried to tell me, oh, it's because of my personal work performance, knowing damn well it was not. And what did that lead to? The day after I was fired from my job, I had to check into a mental health institution. I wanted to kill myself. I wanted to commit suicide. And so, sorry for not putting up the trigger warning on that. But yes, this is something that we are, it's all of these things stacked up. And yes, it's economic, it's the interpersonal, and it was honestly a conversation that I was having at work that led to my dismissal at work, to my firing at work, was a conversation with a white liberal who told me that I should be appreciative of Obama, of Barack Obama. And that was the final straw for me. I couldn't take it. I went off on them in front of the CEO, the COO. I lost my cool. And what did they do? They all of a sudden started to see me and view me as the big scary Black guy. And I'm 6'3". I've always had to, I have all kinds of mannerisms that I've developed over the years to try to make white people feel less threatened by my presence. All right. And I have to practice these things day in, day out. Code switching is a real thing. And we go into the workplace every single day and have to be something that we're not. When I was looking for work, I just got a job after 2 years of being unemployed, 2 years of unemployment. All right. And when I was interviewing for the job, they asked me, why did I leave my last job? And my partner was here and listened to me lie through my teeth and just make up something on the fly, because I couldn't dare tell them that I lost my job because of the racial discrimination that I faced. Because what would they look at me and say? They would say, well, you're one of the bad ones. You're not one of the good ones. You're going to play the race card. You're going to be a problem. So we don't want to hire you. And I say this all at great risk to my own job right now that I have. But that's the reality. This racial trauma, it's still there. It still exists, and it's an everyday thing for us.
So let me step in here. I just want to say, Kamali reached out to me earlier and said he don't know if he can contribute to this conversation. That's what he said to me. And I said, man, you better be on that. You better be on this stream, man. What are you talking about? And what he spoke to just now is what I responded to him. I'm like, every Black person that's going to be on this panel can speak to trauma. We're an expert in the traumatic experience of the American experience. And that's the part where you just expressed, and why I wanted to make sure you came on the show. But what I do want to kind of, same topic, but talk about is the effects of trauma with no repercussions. Breonna Taylor being murdered. Like, what's happening with her family? The cop is, nothing's happening to him. He's, out doing what he does or whatever that person's doing. I forget his name, the Hispanic teenager that was murdered soon after, like late last year in LA by the LAPD. His family, what are they doing? Like, the people who are left here, the survivors of people that are murdered, the survivors of people, who die because of oppression. And there's a lot of different ailments that can lead to that person's death, including murder. My cousin. And I told them, when I went to go visit the first time, I said, we have to understand that this is oppression that's happening here. That was my message to my family the first time I went there. We have to understand that this is not an individual act. This is an oppression, including the shooter.
Can I throw something in quickly with this?
Yes, go ahead.
Just real quickly, and that is that the mother of Kalief Browder, who was murdered by our criminal justice system, she died at a very young age. Kalief ended up dying at the age of 22 after being incarcerated falsely for 3 years, 2 of them in solitary confinement. Eric Garner's daughter, Erica, died at a very young age. Then I believe also another member of his family died. We look at, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the young woman that was murdered by police when she was playing video games with her nephew. And the cop walked outside, saw movement in the house, shot and killed her. Her father died. The family members that are left behind from this terrorism, their lives are profoundly affected. And when we have that intense trauma, that literally can kill us. And it does. So what we're talking about is, does racial trauma, the question I want to ask is, does it serve a purpose? Because I believe it does. It absolutely props up white supremacy, but it is meant to destroy black bodies and black minds. And that is why it continues unabated to this day. And one last thing is the Centers for Disease Control 20 years ago did a study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. They looked at 10 things that could cause trauma in the life of a child. One of those things was having an incarcerated family member. Well, guess what? If you're white, it's like 1 in 60 maybe might have an incarcerated family member. But if you're growing up black in America, that number is far higher. It is one of 10 things that can contribute to making mental illness more likely, suicidality more likely, drug addiction, depression, job problems, but also can contribute to the 10 most preventable causes of disease and death in the United States. The mass incarceration that both Republicans and Democrats, championed by Joe Biden, signed by Bill Clinton, ushered in the 1990s, is meant to not just put bodies in jail, to warehouse black bodies, and that's what it does. It's meant to destroy the black bodies on the outside through trauma, and our own government acknowledges it and does nothing, because I don't hear any Democrat talking, especially Joe Biden, about revoking the 1994 crime bill.
I always say that too, Anthony, and that is, I think maybe he's acknowledged it's not, parts of it could be changed, but they stop there. They never talk about, okay, well, let's go ahead and fix it. It's just kind of, yeah, it's bad and it's funneling people there. Okay, you got that holiday going? What? Like, they don't never address the actual issue. But Kareem did want to kind of comment on what Kamali said. So I do want to give Kareem the opportunity to jump in here.
Yeah, and I think Logan also wants to say something. So maybe Logan's going to go first.
Absolutely. Logan, you can go first, sir.
I wanted to quickly quote Miss Lauryn Hill in one of my favorite lines of hers, and it's, "The subconscious psychology that you use against me, if I lose control, will send me to the penitentiary." And they basically are at all times doing this bully shit where it's like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Like, but like you're walking down the street and people are looking at you weird. And like, you know, you're looking at an ad and like it's got some anti-blackness in it. You're just like, oh, well, and you go to your job and like people are getting promoted over you. And like you are just you're taking hits, like little dings all the time. And I'm sick about hearing about the resilience of Black people, like especially like Black women and Black trans people. Like nobody wants to be resilient. We want to be alive. We want to be happy. Right. And that kind of shit, like, and just like my heart goes out to you, Kamali, because like that's exactly what that's talking about. It's like, you know, you keep getting poked, and eventually you're going to react. Right. And the reason that, and like switching gears back to what was just said, the reason that they're not going to address it is because, look, unless there's a politician talking about fixing the 13th Amendment, they are fucking lying to you about whether or not they're going to stop the prison industrial complex. Okay. That is there for a reason. It is just a rebranding of slavery. And we don't talk about that enough because that's until we don't have a profit motive, right, for free slave labor in this country. We are still a slave holding country today in 2021. That's real. That's not, you know, that's not hyperbole. That's reality. And yes, like, you know, it's going to be Black people first. But the other thing is that what you let happen to your neighbor is going to happen to you. And to me, that's like one of the biggest things about class solidarity is that, look, poor white folks, like y'all got a lot to learn. And like a lot of it's not your fault because you're getting fed the same stuff that we're getting fed. And we've been intentionally separated so that we don't learn by exposure. But whatever, y'all are going to catch it too, you know, and there's more of you than there are of us. So you're going to get it like a lot. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Daniel Shaver video. That is one of the worst things I've ever seen. The one where the cop was basically playing like that murderous game of Simon Says with this man. He's on his knees. He's like, stand up, sit down. Don't, you know, put your hands down. And it's like, he's just playing with the dude. And I'm like, look, white people, that's what you get when you don't help Black people. There's not enough Black people in this country to affect our own liberation. And that's a hard thing to say and a hard thing for Black people to acknowledge, especially Black nationalists and Black separatists. But it's like, look, as long as there are not that many of us, we need solidarity. And it's not just us that need it, right? Because white people need it for their souls, obviously, because like letting that stuff happen, it's fucking you up, right? But also just a numbers game. You need to side with people who are oppressed against your oppressor. We're all getting it. And until you help us, we're all screwed. And that's just how it is.
Beautifully put. Thank you for that, Logan. Before I comment on what you just said, because I do have a follow-up, I do want to bring in Kareem. What was your point? You also wanted to, what Kamali said, kind of you know, gave you something or brought to mind something you wanted to say also, Kareem?
Yeah, so there are actually two things I would like to jump in also on what you talked about, CJ. So first of all, I can relate a bit to what Kamali said about being tall. I'm myself, I'm almost 6'5", and I live in Hong Kong. So you really stand out among small people. You see people becoming fearful when you enter the elevator or the train or whatever. And I've always thought to myself, imagine being this tall and being a dark-skinned Black man, for example. You know, that's that kind of intersectionality we talked about, how these things are all related and can make things worse. But there's also another thing that is really important. And I think also Kamali said that about underprivilege and overprivilege, that people of color are underprivileged. Underprivileged literally means that we live in a deeply unfair cultural system. And white supremacy, the white supremacist system that we are all living in, also diminishes white crime. And with that, I mean white crime that is exactly similar as Black crime. For example, sociological and social psychological research has shown that Black people get higher prison sentences for the same crimes. And now an interesting thing happens, because we also have colorism, that the darker the skin of the Black person, the higher the prison sentence. Okay, so you even see that in the old school colorist kind of direction. And another thing this unfair system does when we talk about white crime versus Black crime, for example, is that a white supremacist system projects its own crimes on its victims. For example, Muslims are barbaric. Muslims are terrorists, while the West is bombing the Middle East into the Stone Age. Blacks are considered violent or even sexual violent, while sexual oppression is one of the most crucial aspects of colonialism and slavery. Okay. Another thing you see now with China, for example, is that Chinese are engaging in genocide, or Chinese are anti-Muslim, while millions of Muslims have been killed by the US. Okay, so it's that kind of almost in some scholars would call that white innocence. Is that kind of white supremacist system creates such an innocence in the mind of people that white people are not as guilty as people of color, that you just see it completely asymmetrical kind of system when it comes to crimes. That's what I wanted to bring in.
And let me just jump in very quickly to that point as well. And you see this just because I want to, make sure that, we also just mentioned, indigenous folks who have been, had genocides committed against them and been ravaged by, and destroyed by white supremacy in this country right here. They were called savages. At the same time, Howard Zinn's People's History of America describes from the own notes of Bartholomew de las Casas, who in Christopher Columbus himself, the vicious, brutal acts that they committed against those indigenous people who only came to them with kindness, with a sense of community and caring and thoughtfulness and no lack of greed or need for individual possession. The society that they described was one that sounded like something out of something that we could only, they call it utopic if you talked about that society, but they called them the savages, even though they came over here and they committed genocide, rape, torture of children, women, innocent men. And so same thing happened there with indigenous people as well. I would just say to Kareem's point.
I think, Kamali, you're speaking to another point or some other conversation I had with, I think maybe it was you, Nick, and that is racism continues to be this issue because white America has yet to face what they've done. If they don't face what they've done, this is going to be a reoccurring issue, every generation going through it every single time. And that is, in order to explain your position of power in the world, in order to explain your position of power in American society, you have to acknowledge the tremendous atrocities you've done to the indigenous people, the tremendous atrocities you've done to the slave population that built this country.
I talk about it a lot.
Right, they can't do that. It has to be, no, we're good. Founding fathers were some smart people, and that's what happened. And Christopher Columbus, you get what I'm saying? It's a completely parallel universe. It is like something out of Hollywood that never happened. It is like American history to me. It's all suspect for me, because the stories that they tell, just look at the story they tell about Christopher Columbus and look at what the reality is. So tell me they didn't apply that same sort of storytelling to cover up other atrocities by other people. And the atrocities committed on people of color, indigenous people, is never a factor when selecting a white American hero, ever. It doesn't make any difference what you did to people of color, indigenous people, when we're considering you to be a white American hero, and that is Columbus. So I just needed to say that part because it was sizzling in my spirit, as Country Wayne would say. But go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
I want to add one thing that backs up your point, and the reason why we even feel the need to call out a lot of people who call themselves white allies, right? Because there are a lot of people who talk about race issues and they put the onus on us, right? Where they'll say, oh, well, black people advocating for black issues, Black Lives Matter going on. And they're like, Black Lives Matter is important. Black Lives Matter is a race issue. And I'm like, Black Lives Matter is not just a race issue. It's a society issue. You see how they separate it? You see how they separate our problem from society problem? Also, another thing they do is they say, okay, they put the onus on, for him, the leftists, they put the onus on people of color to talk about race. And these people are the class reductionists that always like to call out. And these are kind of like the people that they shy. They don't want to talk about critical race theory or anything like that. It's a new version of anti-intellectualism where they say, okay, if you have race problems, that's something that you have to deal with. No, this is the difference between the way you think and the way a real white ally think. Because a real white ally, what they'll say, the race issue is our community issue. So racism is the white community issue that you guys should be trying to solve as well. Instead of doing what some people already say in the comments. A lot of people in the comments they always say, well, they're just class. It's just class.
Yeah.
Just class, right? There's so many things to say about this. And I know Kareem got a lot of words. We talk about this all the time in the International Leftist Coalition.
We want to give Angelique an opportunity to jump in here, because I know I've had several, maybe 2 or 3 interviews with you, so I know a topic like this, and in particular what we're talking about right here. I'm curious just to know, what we've been talking about, just Nick and Kareem, what in the comments I've just made. What is your take on that? That America kind of doesn't accept and has never accepted and faced the reality of what they've done to people, and they trying to keep that hidden from their people, and their people are blindly saying, yeah, we're great, this country was formed greatly, and we did this great thing, as they're purposely blocking from seeing what's happening. You get what I'm saying? So Angelique, what are your thoughts on any part of that, or any comments that you've been waiting to say?
So much has been said by Kamali and Jay and Logan. You said so much that really struck a chord with me. It's that American exceptionalism. That's the way it's maintained. That's the way it's maintained. You have to, tell yourself, okay, it's the founding fathers. They built this great country, even though it was the foundational Black Americans that built this country. You have to tell yourself that. You don't give credit to Black people, foundational Black Americans at all. That's what you have to say. You have to say, you can't maintain the great lie, the big lie, if you don't maintain it.
Right. It's almost like
it's built on a lie. It's built on a lie, and it's very shaky foundation. But that's what this country is built on. So you can't keep that going if you tell the truth about this country. This country was built by foundational Black Americans. Foundational Black Americans were stolen from. We're still stealing from them. We're still exploiting them. Mm-hmm. You can't do it. You can't do it.
So what do you and I'll pose this question not to just to you, but to everybody on the panel. This is, I guess maybe this is not directly part of the conversation. What and I'll pose this to Professor Anthony. What does a non-privileged, non-disadvantaged society look like? Why can't that happen? Why does the dominant culture, and I'm not asking you to speak as a white person, I'm asking you to speak in your capacity of just your years in your field, and just understanding politics and you, so as yourself, not as in your professional capacity. Why do you believe there is a willful ignorance to white privilege? Is there a willful ignorance to white privilege? Is there a willful ignorance to it? I feel like America does what they do to Black people and continue. It's because they don't want to give credit that America was built on the backs of African slaves. They don't want to give that credit. They don't want to give credit to the slavery industrial complex, which is actually the foundation of American capitalist business. And I tweeted that article from a Forbes article today. But go ahead, Anthony. What are your thoughts on that, or any part of that?
Let's psychoanalyze white America, because let me tell you, we could write volumes. It is it is a disastrous example of what a severe inferiority complex does. Remember this: white people, because they did not want to acknowledge the amazing contributions of civilizations that started on the continent of Africa, said that no way could they have built the pyramids. It must have been the aliens. Like, that's how crazy white people are, that they can't even acknowledge that the great civilizations started in Africa, and they had mathematics, and they had architecture and science and all of these things. So yeah, when we look at what happens today, I think it is a severe psychosis that exists.
Can I ask why? That's Mike. But why does dark skin do that? Why looking at dark skin why does that, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what?
Well, you're grift. If you know that you're not really what you say you are. Who just talked about that? Was it Angelique, or just about America having to walk around saying we're the best all the time? Like, who does that, right? Like, I worked a lot when I first started as a social worker in elementary schools and middle schools, and that would be the schoolyard bully. The one who didn't think that much of themselves was always the one walking around bragging and saying, I'm the best, I'm great. And that kind of insanity, that is, I don't know other countries that do that. I haven't traveled extensively, but I've been to Europe and I've been to other countries. I don't hear people walking around saying, Sweden is the greatest country in the world, but the United States has to do it all the time. And it's that, that patriarchal, heteropatriarchal, white, that capitalism that is so afraid of any critique. So I liken it to the work that I did with domestic violence, with intimate partner abuse. The abuser never wants to acknowledge the conflict, the disparity in power, because it threatens their position. Their position, the abuser in those relationships, is one of comfort. So they've got comfort. Why would they want their victim, say it's a woman that they're abusing, to understand the dynamics here? So they isolate them socially. They blame them. They tell them, you're crazy. And that, over years and years, slowly destroys that person's ability to say, wait a second, I'm in an abusive relationship. I might be able to leave and get help, right? So white America does the same thing to Black America. White America, and I'm not saying all whites. There are poor whites who are acknowledging it. But for the most part, they're not poor because they're white, right? So there's a difference. White America has a position of comfort. It does not want to give it up. And it is not, I believe, sadly, going to give it up freely. And it's not going to give it up just because we asked nicely. And we've tried. I'll throw that out to the group, but I just think that perspective to me is important.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. I kind of saw a couple of people wanting to chime in, so I'll give the opportunity just to open. Anyone wanted to chime in there before I go to my next question here?
Certainly, I just wanted to say that, this point about, because I feel like in these, in these conversations and even in left spaces, I feel like I get this a lot because of, we do have folks that want to be class reductionists in that way of trying to reduce everything down to class, and to say, okay, well, but the situation that we have to all acknowledge is that, revolution starts from within, right? The revolution has to begin within ourselves. If we can't, go out there and be hypocrites and tell other people that they have to change all of society when we're unwilling to even reflect on our own behaviors, our own, power dynamics and privileges, and to change those things, right? So all revolution has to begin from within and through a process of self-reflection. And I think that, what we're asking and what I'm asking of poor white folks is, I'm a poor Black person, you know, but also I need to acknowledge that I have male privilege, I have cis privilege, I have all kinds, you know, there are power, I have, you know, heteronormative privilege, you know, so these are the same things. I have to unpack these things. I have to assess these things in my own life and in the way that I relate to others around me, because we can uplift Black people and still be left with, you know, a transphobic, homophobic, you know, society. And so we have to really, you know, these things can't come step by step. They have to come all at once, or else we can't ask our trans, you know, or non-binary, you know, comrades to come along with us on this and to be in solidarity with us if we are still looking out and saying, well, now's not your time, you know, or trying to play the, you know, you know, these ones are getting ahead faster than these other people, the Dave Chappelle, you know, take on the world, you know, where it's trying to pit one person against another. It's not just the rich people that are demagoguing, but it's also, you know, people that hold any sort of form of power dynamic. And that's why I do consider myself, you know, an anarchist and wanting to destroy all forms of hierarchy, all forms of, you know, power over another human being. We really need to unpack and start to look at it in not just to talk about it and to talk about, you know, how other people should change, but to think about how we can do it in our own lives. You know, folks that are, you know, Fred Hampton leftists will be familiar. You know, as soon as I, you know, came into the organization, I immediately began to talk, and I'm trying to do the work with my comrades to try to start to, you know, to enact these principles within, you know, right where we exist, you know, in the places that we have direct control over, because it's not enough to just go out there and to talk about it every day. But the real work that we have to do, the most important work I think that we can do, is in the spaces that we actually have control over, right? And for most of us, that happens to be, you know, either, you know, our workplace or within our communities, and not just going out there as leftists online and to talk about it and to talk about how other people need to change, but to really begin to do the work and unpack hierarchies within our own lives, within our relationships, our, you know, our partnerships, and to start to do that work. And so, you know, that's just something that I want to say, you know, put out there. Yeah.
It's real.
CJ, you're muted.
CJ.
Sorry about that. Thank you for injecting that particular point into this conversation, because that is a great point. I do want to play this short clip of one of our panelists, Professor
looking
Anthony.
rather dapper, I would say.
Yes, he's looking pretty good there. Now, the title of this video is "How Capitalism Negatively Affects Development." So I feel like it is part of what we're talking about here. So I do want to play this clip here. So I won't play all of it, but I will play maybe a minute or two of it. So here he goes. Oh, sorry. Let me turn up the volume here. And there we go.
In 2008, the National Institutes of Health conducted a study where they compared the brains of rich kids with the brains of poor kids. And what they found was astounding. The brains of poor kids had been damaged to the extent that they resembled that of adult stroke victims. And the part of their brains that were impacted the most was the prefrontal cortex. And that's responsible for advanced thinking, judgment, and impulse control. And it's involved in the storage and the retrieval of memories. So science was showing us that the link between low socioeconomic status and poor academic achievement had absolutely nothing to do with a lack of motivation in these kids. It had to do with the fact that their brains have been profoundly impacted by poverty and inequality. We've been told for the longest time that societies based on competition, individualism, and inequality are the typical capitalist economies, that these are the best societies to get people to reach their fullest potential. In fact, the more competition and inequality a society has, we've been told that's what gives the incentive for people to bring themselves up from the bottom and pull themselves up by their bootstraps to make it to the middle class or beyond. But that's just not so. In fact, more equal societies do far better on a whole range of issues, including academic achievement, but they also have less violent crime, less family violence. And these societies, people have a longer life expectancy and they live healthier and happier lives. If you're not aware of the number of children in the United States that are poor, or what the federal poverty level is for that matter, you're not alone. Most Americans don't know that 1 in 5 children in this country are growing up in poverty, and that the federal poverty level is $24,000 for a family of 4. I live on Long Island. You can't survive as a family of 2 for $24,000 a year, let alone 4 people. And experts have said that the poverty level itself is half what it should be. It should be twice that in order for families to have what they need to get their basic necessities met. And if we do set the level of poverty more accurately, more than 2 in 5 kids in the United States would be considered poor. As it stands now, more than half the kids who graduate high school have been on food stamps at some point in their lives. And poverty is a leading cause of death in the United States. More people die because of poverty and inequality than because of heart disease or strokes or even drug overdoses. So it's the inequality that is actually creating a state of chronic stress that is damaging the developing bodies and brains of these kids.
Okay. I'm going to end it there. I think the point was made. The focus of this video or this TED Talk was capitalism and poverty. But when we're talking about the Black community and the treatment of Black community, poverty and capitalism are intertwined. You cannot disconnect those two. So I felt like what you're saying in the video speaks to the same discussion, the same topic. And I want to bring it to the real traumatic effects, the diseases, the conditions, the anxiety, the PST, the rage, Black rage. You can't be upset. And me and Nick and I have talked about this, about the silliness of civility politics, where, and the example I always give is that they want to be able to do you wrong and you not be upset at all. That's what they want. Because if you express what a normal human being would express with such treatment and prolonged treatment, it's not like Black people, this is just new. This is prolonged. So this is a cumulative, built up rage. I have it. I could tell you, I have it. Just from the experiences I've had. So I want to talk about that. And let's go to Logan first, because I haven't heard you speak. And then we're going to go to Nick. Logan, I want you to, all of us, to kind of speak to our own traumatic experience. I don't mean anything specific to you, but like somebody you may have known, what you have seen in general with Black people. I don't think, for example, it's a coincidence in our culture. We talk about drinking and smoking a lot. That's a coping mechanism. And it's just now part of our Black culture. Oh, we smoke. It's to get through things. You get what I'm saying? So
medication, yeah.
Right. So Logan, so all of that, what say you about all of that there?
So let me give the example of my cousin. And basically since day one, this guy has never had a fair shot, right? Like, you start in a relatively poor neighborhood, and we all know that, since
Uh-oh, did he pause a second? Let's give him a second. Sometimes it comes back.
Since, property values are linked to like undereducated. And then, the best way for you to get money is, okay, we're going to go to the military. And then you go to the military and then they mess you up. They sent him to Iraq and he got messed up. Right. And there was the racialized experience, and there was also the capitalist experience, and there was also the war experience. Right. Then he gets out of war. Right. Realizes that he had been the bad guy, which messes you up. Right. So then you went to like fight for your country under a bunch of lies. And then you come back to a country that doesn't like you, and that is basically just treats you like any other Black dude, even though they support the troops, whatever. Then, he gets into some trouble, ends up in jail. Then he gets that experience. Right. And where it's like, people that look like him oppressing him for the same reasons, because we end up oppressing each other, right? And so that is, and the problem is that his is a typical experience. It's not like he is an anomaly. He is just like, that's just another story. Because, and I will end by saying this. A lot of people may
Just give him a second. See if he comes back.
make fun of pottery. At a certain point, it's like a relatively reasonable thing to do.
Okay, Logan, you're breaking up there, Logan. So if you can hear me, yeah, you're breaking up. So let's bring in Nick. Nick, same sort of question. If you have a story of your own,
because
I'm sorry, Logan, we couldn't hear you at first. Are you back? Okay. Oh, same sort of question, Nick. If you have a story of your own traumatic experience, or the trauma that you're going through, or trauma you've seen, or experience you've seen, the system that what has done to somebody you know, what say you, Nick?
Yeah. I'll rail against the culture war because it only is useful for both sides. But the culture war also is very hurtful for us when we talk about this real trauma that we're going through. Now, there's this mainstream discussion on critical race theory that is deeply unserious. And when I say that, it's deeply unserious on both sides. It's a reflection of the anti-intellectualism that we have in our country. And what I mean by that is when and this is kind of me summing up what A1 was saying. And when we talk about trauma, what we were talking about, we are talking about critical race theory when we bring this up. We're talking about how the structures that are in place impacts my life as a Black American, and we can also tie that in with how that affects Indigenous people, Latinos, immigrants, even the white poor working class. But there's such a misrepresentation of what critical race theory really is that there's all this misrepresentation about what it's actually about. But that's me simply talking about how the prison industrial complex can steal the wealth of our families. And when we talk about how, and this kind of brought up in the video that you played, when someone is killed by police in your family, that's a giant blow to generational wealth that has not been developed, amount of finances that have been strained on multiple generations of Black family members moving forward. So this is what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is literally thinking critically about race. And the anti-intellectualism in this country is so strong that just the conversation about critically thinking about race and how it connects in our lives, it turns this country into a frenzy. Now, to answer your question and explain exactly what I mean, I explained this story multiple times. I talk about the financial, and this is something that the neoliberals are deeply unserious about. When we talk about the neoliberal policies that taint Black wealth, we have Wall Street that will legally foreclosing. When I mean illegally, I'm talking about forging signatures because they knew that the Black and disenfranchised communities that they were forging signatures and legally kicking out their house, they won't have the ability to lawyer up. And once again, they were targeting Black and disenfranchised community with this stuff. Also, another thing, our president, the guy that we have in office right now, notorious senator for Wall Street, right? And I mentioned this a long time on my show, but I got to bring it up again because a lot of people don't understand why I could never support this guy. So he was known as a senator for Wall Street, senator for the banks, and he fought against legislation that would make it harder to hold financial institutions responsible for financial fraud. And I know this because I used to sell cars, so I'm in the know. And we had to go through this whole racial sensitivity training because Toyota Financial and many capitalist institutions that loans out to car lenders, they were racially discriminating against Black customers. And I was one of them, oddly enough. I was one of them. And I was found through a lawsuit through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which Joe Biden opposed, by the way. So what the lawsuit found was me as a Black man in my current economic status, where I had a single mom who had to sign for my first car loan. But if you take a white kid in my same financial situation, same credit score, same single mom co-signing, They had a lower interest rate, and it was proven in the court of law. Where my first car loan, I paid a shit ton more interest just because I was black, and the margins in which I was living under, guys, the margins in which I was living under in my early 20s as a college student. Do you understand how much that would have helped me if I had that extra money that I was paying the interest? Because, by the way, the number is low because I know I'm in the car business. We negotiated this, the car business negotiated this down. I got a check in mail for $1,000 because of fraud, and that's when they calculated the overdue payment on interest. Once again, that's low because car companies and their lawyers negotiate the lawsuit down. So this is the kind of money we are talking about that is being siphoned from our community because of our racist capitalist system. This is a real example, and I gave Joe Biden as an example because I want people to understand this is policies that he endorsed and he implemented. So if it were for Joe Biden, I wouldn't have got that check. That whole lawsuit wouldn't happen because he supported an amendment in the bankruptcy bill that would make it harder to go after these institutions. And that's just one out of many. Because someone mentioned the crime bill before. We talk about the massive wealth that was siphoned from disenfranchised community from those. But just to keep it short, I just give you guys one example, and that's just one example of the neoliberal policies that it caused the trauma in the black community. And that's why when I said earlier on, remember when I said that both sides are unserious on critical race theory? This is why people don't take it seriously, because they see people like that dude Terry McAuliffe in Virginia who lost, and they say he lost because he was advocate of critical race theory. Guys, Terry McAuliffe didn't support ending qualified immunity. The vast majority of Republican voters support ending qualified immunity. That protects police from civil lawsuits when they do illegal behavior. So how in the hell did the guy who is an instrument of the fascist police state, like Terry McAuliffe is, become the liberal face of critical race theory?
Propaganda.
It's because the Democrats hijack serious conversations about race and they make it into a culture war that is a losing battle. I'm telling you, the leftist argument on race is a winning battle. I know, because I had conservatives that watched it like, y'all never even thought about the shit this way before. Like, I literally been through this because if you have liberals that talk about race, they know you full of shit because you support the white supremacist systems. And then when you talk about race to these people, they can smell the hypocrisy. And the conservatives say it all the time, and a lot of them are full of shit when they say it. But they say, well, the Democrat Party, they're just taking advantage of black and Latino votes.
Yeah.
And when they say that, they may not say it for the right reasons, but they're telling the truth, right? And that's why that could never be bridged. But I ended there, and I want to pass it to the panel because that's why there's a lot of liberal hypocrisy on critical race theory as well. And I think it's my job as a black leftist to start pointing that out, because there's a lot of people that think that Terry McAuliffe is the critical race theory guy. When he support the fascist police state. He don't he support trickle down economics that financially questions. But anyway, sorry, back to the panel.
No, that was a great story about your experience.
I want to hear about Kareem. I think Kareem.
Yeah, but let me tell you about my experience with the American experience. It's not my personal, but it's my cousin. So I have an uncle, or I had an uncle. He had 8 kids. When he was murdered, I think all but 2 were under 18. So that completely changed the trajectory of that family. Completely. And let me tell you the story of repression and how my uncle was shot. He drove himself to the hospital. You want to talk about oppression and how it affects the black community, which let's talk about hospitals. He drove to the hospital. The hospital was Martin Luther King. The nickname of Martin Luther King was called Killer King at the time in Compton. And it was called Killer King because you went there with an ailment that you should not have died of. And they called it Killer King. It was underfunded. It was horribly ran because it serviced black and brown people. So he gets shot, drives himself to the hospital, should have survived, but for whatever reason doesn't survive. And it completely changes the trajectory of a family, a single mom, my aunt, with 8 kids, all under 18, or 2 or 6 are under 18. That's the story that feels like is denied when white America doesn't want to acknowledge the existence of oppression. Like, the trajectory of that family was not there. What happened to them was the system. I mean, at every point, from the person who shot him, for him having to be out that late working because he's being paid a low wage, having to work multiple jobs. So that's 2. Then you're talking about the hospital that's underfunded, that they don't really care how it's even being ran because it services Black people and brown people. This is the middle of the crack epidemic. So we're talking mid-'80s. You're talking where I'm knowing people are dying every week, get shot. And to grow up in that, and I mean, I'm telling the experience of my cousin. I'm just mentioned something that, and I just realized that's a traumatic experience for myself. So what I'm saying, or what I'm getting to, is that these things that this system that America is placing on Black Americans through a system of oppression, it's not just affecting us economically. Like, this has long-term effects. You might be thinking, oh, so-and-so is just that way. No, that's from years of oppression that they've grown. And now we just think that's their personality. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's just so baked in, and it's at times it's hopeless. Like, what are we gonna do? It's hopeless. And Kamali spoke to that despair at a time in his life where he felt that despair. And that's what I want. That's what I'm saying. It's the despair. It's the feeling of everything coming at you, and it's simply because of this. You can't get out of that. You get what I'm saying? You can't get out of your skin, but you feel you can't get ahead because of your skin. That traumatic experience. So I do want to bring in the 2 doctors here. So Kareem, we're rounding up the conversation. I know there's still another 20, 30 minutes left, but I feel like we're probably going to use that up pretty quickly with everybody having such great content tonight. Lending your knowledge in the field, Kareem, of cultural trauma, like what are, like, when you knew you were coming on this show, what are some of the things you felt like was important to mention? What are some of the ideas that came to mind, front of mind, where you're saying this needs to be said in this conversation? I want to ask you that, and I also want to ask you, Anthony, that same question.
Ooh, this is a very tough question. I think one of the most important things is actually that people finally start to believe the everyday experience of oppression of people who are not classified as European white. Okay, this may sound very weird, and some people really cannot understand it, but it's everywhere and it's every day. And I think it also touches a bit on what Nick just said about the whole class and race discussion. And that is, let's take a poor white person who is suffering as well, economically, maybe doing 3 jobs, having to raise kids, putting food on the table, and so forth. But even as a poor white person, you do not live in a culture that continuously tries to make you feel bad about yourself because of the racial category that has been assigned to you. And with that, also the threats to your life that comes with that. Police violence, a health situation, the way people treat you, chances for a job, chances for education, and so forth. And the interesting thing is that a theory like critical race theory actually shines a light on the systemic nature, the institutional nature of racist oppression. And the fact that so many white people become so enraged when they hear the word CRT tells me, instead of being quiet and just listen, like, hey, what is going on here, and studying themselves, that it induces so much rage, tells me that it's not going to come from them to dismantle the system of oppression. Okay, that is number one. I think that is something we really need to start accepting. Okay, even though we have a lot of white allies such as Anthony, such as Peter, and so forth, it's not going to come from the collective because the system is too beneficial for people classified as white. That's number one. Number two, and that is something Logan said, and I think he said something very, very good there, is that the detrimental experience of racism is actually something that has become normal. Okay, he talked about the family member that goes into the prison system, goes into the army, all these things that are normal for people who are oppressed. The system of racism creates what you could say a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, because you have these experiences day to day, it creates a person that actually you can almost say that actually fulfills this idea of the person that's being oppressed. What I'm trying to say, for example, you're being oppressed every day. You're internalizing your own inferiority, so you become angry. You become angry at the world. You lash out. What does that mean? People will say, you see, that black person is angry. Look at that. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have the same with Moroccans in the Netherlands, for example, who seem to become very paranoid, looking around and looking, always feeling a bit stressed. And people will always say, oh, they are so they look so angry all the time. No, these people are paranoid. They know they are continuously being observed and being judged. And it's the same with poverty and crime. If you have certain groups of people who are systematically being put into poverty, you get more crime. And when you get more crime, you have a system that says, you see, these people have a tendency for criminal behavior. So racist systems create a self-fulfilling prophecy that is perpetuating itself continuously. That's what I wanted to bring in, CJ.
That is very profound. I mean, I can understand from what you're saying, I can understand why that was something you wanted to say. But just to piggyback, and then I'm going to go to you, Anthony, what can be done? How can we move forward? What could be the remedy, Kareem?
I think one of the most important things is that we keep talking about it and keep educating and not letting people who are not aware of this systemic system of oppression, and do not let them control the debate about what we should talk about and what we should not talk about. And that includes some very famous white leftists who start to bash CRT, who start to bash anti-racism. And even though we may be a big fan of these people, I think we should own these terms, because all of them have been turned into insults. Woke has been turned into insult. Anti-racism has been turned into insult. Social justice has been turned into insult. CRT, they're now trying to turn into insult. And it's time for leftists of all colors, of all background, to start owning these terms and say, well, actually, the CRT is a very important aspect. And we keep talking about it, and we keep educating people until hopefully something is going to change in the future.
Thank you so much, Kareem, for saying that, because I had this note here sitting here that said, anti-woke left in this discussion on popular policy and what's popular. And just thank you so much, because this is something that frustrates me to no end, even in especially in leftist spaces where people should know better. But you constantly hear this, and you constantly hear, some of the biggest names in left media, Kyle Kalinske, so many folks. Honestly, I don't want to sit here and name names and call out individuals. They know who they are. All right, these anti-woke leftists who take up the mantle of the right wing and run with the right wing narratives of, as if being woke should be something that, this happened when there was a commercial that came out where the CIA, they had some woman of color, who would come out and in this video, said, oh, well, I'm a woman of color. And she was, promoting like US imperialism essentially. And the whole idea of it and the way that leftists approach it was to say that, this is the problem with wokeness. You see, this is where wokeness gets you. And all they're doing is doing the work of the right wing, running with their narrative. And I see it time and time again with the narrative on CRT, on any of these measures. We should not take up the framing of the right wing and run with that. Just because something isn't popular doesn't mean that we should shy away from it as leftists.
Civil rights was unpopular too, Kamali. Civil rights was unpopular too.
Some of these same people, they loved Bernie for having principal positions way back when those positions were not popular.
Exactly.
These same people, that would say, and so it's about being on the right side of history constantly and not waiting until, to be reactionary and reactive, but to be proactive in these spaces and to say, just because it's not popular, just because, even, Nick was speaking to the culture war that they tried to say, okay, well, it's not going to, this isn't going to be a winning issue for us. This is why I say, if it's not a winning issue, then let's start to gather in our spaces more closely and within our own communities, because I don't need to win with white people. I don't need to win with with people that want.
That's what I don't understand about this.
And I want to add this, because there's a lot of confusion when me and my friend had then left her sister Finney said we need a black and brown led leftist movement. I've seen this because whenever we say this, there's a lot of white leftists that immediately get in their feelings. And what you guys are discussing, this is exactly why we say this. Because what happens when you have a white bourgeoisie left led movement? You get this anti-woke left sentiment from Kamali. And what does this lead to? This leads to the people saying stuff like, well, yeah, I understand the problem of police violence, but I don't like the slogan that defund the police because that may hurt. It may hurt the Democrats. This is what Crystal Ball said on Rising. What she said. Well, I'm in favor of this, but I don't know how it polls well. So when you have movements that are not led from a black and indigenous brown point of view, those movements get left behind by the white-led bourgeoisie. So that's why we say we need to have black-led movement. That's why we need to have indigenous-led movement. Because if you have an indigenous-led movement, they're not going to abandon Line 3. If you have a white bourgeoisie-led movement, guess what they're abandoning right now? Guess who they're abandoning right now? They sold the police state.
Perfect example is white feminism in America. Perfect example of that is white feminism. In America. But I do want to bring in Anthony. Same sort of question. When we've talked about this several times. If there's anything you missed in our last conversation that we talked about, or since you've asked you to come on to this episode, what was burning on your mind that, hey, this is something I really want to make sure is included in this conversation, this idea, this information?
There's a couple of quick things, and one is that thank you to all the other panelists. You're going to keep me up late tonight thinking about everything that was said tonight and unpacking it. So there's a couple of things in no particular order that come to mind. What Nick was just saying, and we were talking about critical race theory. It's this ability, and it's amazing. I have to say, the Democrats are so good at this to take a concept, peel out all the meaning from it, and just have the label.
Exactly.
And I don't know if anybody in the media, present company excluded, but anybody in the mainstream media or in politics or anyone who's talked about critical race theory has ever read about critical race theory, because I'm getting the impression that they haven't, right? And and for those that want to educate, I mean, there's no shame in not knowing about something, but don't act like you do, right? Don't say, oh, critical race theory is bad,
And see, that's what the conservatives did. And then the Democrats said, oh, but we're not teaching it. Instead of saying, well, why don't we talk about what critical race theory is? So read Angela Harris, go back to the 70s and 80s and read Derek Bell. These, you know, and there's tons of books on it. Like there's primers out there. Go read and educate yourselves before making this a political football. But, you know, speaking of football, they do the same thing with Colin Kaepernick. It's this facade of wokeness. I support Colin Kaepernick, and Colin Kaepernick is better than this guy. And they all say all this stuff. Well, I challenge any of these liberals, especially white liberals who are anti-defund the police, to read Colin Kaepernick's new book that he edited. It's called Abolition for the People, because he's talking about abolishing police and prisons. See, but they won't deal with that. They like the image of Martin Luther King. They put a beautiful statue, if you like it. Some people don't like that statue, but they put a beautiful statue of him up in D.C., but they erase his radical nature, that what drove him. And of course, they'll never put a statue of Malcolm up in D.C.
No, absolutely not.
After the revolution, we'll do it. So here's a message I want to get out. This is really important, though. With all of these distractions we see, when we talk about risk in the Black community, risk for physical diseases, mental illness, addiction, behavior that we call criminal, right? But we never call the white behavior criminal. That risk is not because of a person's Black skin. It's because of the racism and the psychotic inferiority complex of white people who want to remain on top and remain comfortable, and how they treat people with Black and brown skin. There is nothing defective about melanin, right? It is the way you're treated because of your melanin that causes these negative things. The disease isn't being Black. The disease is how white power structure treats people because they're Black or brown. And that must be looked at and talked about. There needs to be a lateral, a horizontal movement for liberation in all fields, the fields that I'm in, the mental health field, to say that half of what we believe is bullshit and lies meant to make people feel like Kareem talked about, pathologizing people. It's all bullshit. It's not science. We have to do it in education. We've got to do, and this is what critical race theory talks about, that you need to look at it through this lens. I do have hope, though, because first of all, you guys are phenomenal, and this exists. We're having these conversations. I see, you know, the people who have the podcasts are doing phenomenal work. Nick is getting on a very well-regarded, no controversy indebted, but like with the Jimmy Dore show, that's a big platform, and we didn't have this years ago. So I do have hope. I'll leave it there. I just think a lot has to happen.
No, thank you for that. And I think my comment on kind of what everybody kind of comment on, which is CRT. I'll be honest with you, I haven't read a lot about it, meaning other than people's reaction to it. And it's very telling, white America's reaction to CRT. And it goes to what we've already talked about. They can't have any breaking of that facade. They can't have any uncovering of that veneer that because of in order for them to have their privilege, they had to have done all these atrocities to all these people. Because in order to keep their privilege, these set of people have to be oppressed. That is not something they want to even address. So if you're going to talk about how race even exists, or talk about how, you know, people of color go through these extra things that people that are white, they don't want that to be told at all, because it points out how the system is messed up and how oppression does exist. Go ahead.
CJ, what does it say about their frail ideology
exactly
that they have to ban Marxism and critical race theory in schools? The same people that say oh, we believe in the freedom of exchange of ideas. The same frauds who say they believe in the principle of free speech. They are quick to ban something like critical race theory because they know once these discussions are had, once these seeds are planted, once your little Zoomer kids start saying some radical communist shit to you, no putting that Jenny back in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, they can hold on and maintain control, but once that ideology get planted in, and I see it all the time with like the millennial moms complain that their kids are all woke now. So this is the new age of book burning, the banning of teaching these ideas and structures in education. And one last thought I want to leave you, just to let you guys know the absurdity of the public reaction to critical race theory. Think about this. You have the right that are saying that our schools is teaching insane racial ideology to our kids. But CJ, what do we talk about on this show all the time about how our schools taught us about Malcolm X and the Black Panthers? Our schools taught us that our country dropping nuclear bombs in Japan, in Hiroshima, was justified. And that's completely false. They say it was necessary to save American soldiers' lives. Why am I bringing up these examples? I'm bringing up these examples because the argument that they were painting that we are somehow living in a leftist public education infrastructure is beyond absurd. They teach us that capitalism is a well-sustaining system. I was taught that socialism is a failed system. They didn't, when I was in school, they didn't tell me anything about sanctions. And that's a very big part about how socialism has fared especially in the Western Hemisphere. So my point is, they complain that there's this teaching about critical race theory in public education, but it's actually the exact opposite. We are trained white supremacist capitalist propaganda. That's why I made the point earlier. If maybe on my show, but I said that if you are not brainwashing your kid to be a communist or to be an anti-capitalist, you are actually failing humanity. And people are saying, well, you believe in brainwashing your kids? If you don't brainwash your kids to be anti-capitalist, the capitalist propaganda to take hold before that. Because it's going to come through your schools. Sorry, last thing. The right wing was complaining that Sesame Street had a vaccine tweet, right? The right wing lost their mind. Because how dare Sesame Street promote vaccines? You want to know why I think it's worse than that? Having a war criminal, Anthony Blinken, on Sesame Street. They did this a few months ago. And they did it a few years ago as well. So that's the propaganda that is instituted on kids. A war criminal like Blinken teaching the kids how the war works.
That's freaking terrible. I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea that he had even.
So my point
appeared on there. Go ahead.
My point was if you don't teach your kids, Anthony Blinken's gonna get there. That's my point. I didn't finish that. I'm sorry, CJ. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to bring in Angelique here. I know you haven't been on Twitter much, but what is your reaction to what you've heard maybe in the news or read about suburban moms, for example, their reaction to critical race theory? Like, what is your reaction to their reaction? Like, what does that say to you, how they're responding to that?
I mean, yeah, I really haven't been on Twitter in quite a while. Yeah, I don't have a reaction to it. I don't. I mean, suburban moms, suburban white moms. I mean, it doesn't affect me either way. I mean,
it doesn't surprise you either.
It has nothing to do with my welfare or my happiness or the welfare and happiness of other foundational Black Americans. So it doesn't affect me either way. I'll be honest with you. I don't even really know much of anything about critical race theory. I just feel like, I mean, the lashing out or the backlash from it, I mean, it's typical. I mean, it's what you're going to get from the dominant society. Anything that bucks dominant society, anything that bucks white supremacy, which is the system, this is what you get. I mean, I don't know. It's just typical.
I feel like I want to say this just so you guys understand how ridiculous this whole thing is, because I was not taught critical race theory in school, and apparently that is only taught in elite academia. And I actually had to look into this. You guys know that critical race theory, and I know a lot of you guys say you guys study it. It's essentially just a study of how our structures affect our race. Like, the kind of conversations we have all the time. And then it's about the study of historical examples, the study how the transfer of wealth impacts the current standing of Black America. And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of you guys, like, I know CJ, I talk about this with CJ all the time. This is stuff that we inherently know. It's just critical race theory. It's like it's just the
name for it.
Yeah.
Oh, got you.
So, and once again, what does that tell you? That people are scared to talk about this, and this is the argument that the right use. The right say, "Oh, teaching critical race theory is tearing apart this country because people are learning about the crimes of America." This is how not for real. That's literally what they argue. They say you can't teach this because it makes poor white kids feel bad.
No, that's Nick. I was just about to bring that point up when you were done talking. It feels like they don't care if they don't want their kids learning what actually is going on.
Exactly.
And this is what speaks to what I said earlier. The country keeps revisiting race because the older generation always tries to hide to the younger generation what happened, what's going on, what happened in the past tense, and what's going on in the present tense. And this is just an example. Oh, no, we can't do that because the oppressive class, the ruling class, understands if white kids begin to understand what's going on. Like somebody said, we can't do it all by ourselves. If white people start to be white, younger population start to say, hey, something like this ain't, you know what I'm saying? Like if they start to understand, so they can't be taught this, because if they start to understand, those numbers go up because of the solidarity of more people, then we're able to do something. So I feel like it's all a strategy to keep Black people, to keep the status quo, to keep Black people where they are, to keep indigenous people where they are, to keep people
just to illustrate how little they teach critical race theory. And I think Kamali wanted to jump in, but just to illustrate how little, I still remember. And once again, me and CJ talk about this plenty of times. I like the narrative they brought to me was like after the civil rights era, like racism got better, right? That's what they told us in schools. Like after the Civil Rights Act, things immediately got better in this country. That's literally the exact opposite of critical race theory. Like the critical race theory literally explains the exact opposite, how despite all this stuff that happened, racism is still a large problem. So I just want to say that the people that are against critical race theory, I just want to keep highlighting how unserious they are. And
do you think, Nick, they know that's the results, or you think they're ignorant of it and they
just
really,
a lot of people
are
a lot. When I use the term serious, I really mean it, and because and I say it once, I say it again. A lot of conservatives say, "Oh, why you always use the race card?" Like, bro, there's no person that used the race card. There's no one who uses identity politics more than the average Republican voter. And so their reaction to critical race theory is literally they against it just out of white identity politics. They just see race and they see critical in theory. Like, fuck it, I don't like it. Like they're just that simple.
I saw somebody get an interview. I saw somebody get an interview, Nick, and they were asking them just what you said. Hey, what is? And they were like, I don't know, but I don't like it.
yeah. People, there's many times there have been many segments done where they just ask like the people who don't like critical race theory what it is. They have no idea. They have no idea. So that shows that's initial reaction that is based in identity politics. But so I want to get Kamali. I think Kamali wanted to jump.
Yeah, go ahead, Kamali.
Oh yeah, I'll echo what Nick said. The critical race theory is an advanced graduate level course. This is not something that is being indoctrinating children. These are advanced concepts that are not taught until graduate level.
Right.
So the idea that it's somehow influencing their children is just completely a false narrative, and just something to distract from the real struggles and suffering of marginalized peoples, and to continue to try to drum up anger and discontent.
But think about that. Think about that, Kamali. How is this not playing to racism? Because it's not even going to be taught to these kids when I'm talking about the Virginia race, but they're using it. Why would you use something that's not even going to be taught to your kids unless you know it has something to do with race? Why are you using race then? If we're not race society, if you're not racist, why are we using race for something that's not even going to be taught to them?
And I think that's because, you know, this, and I do think that is, you know, demagoguery is real. And what they want to do is to try to divide us up along as many arbitrary lines as possible, you know, but, you know, black people over here, white people over here, men over here, women over here, you know, cis people over here, trans people over here, gay people over here, straight people over here, and try to continue to divide us up. And because otherwise, you know, if we did have a true, you know, class solidarity and people actually acknowledge that and did work in within true class solidarity, the way that the ruling class clearly has a class solidarity, it would be detrimental. It would be, you know, completely destructive to the power structures that are in place right now. And so, of course, it does benefit the people that are up at the top and the people that continue to maintain power, right? It continues to benefit, you know, men. Patriarchy continues to benefit men. So let's continue to divide men and women up along these lines, and allow men to continue to try to dominate over women. And we will continue to try to, you know, turn a blind ear to that, even as men and black men, because it stands to benefit us if we do not, you know, dismantle those power structures, because, well, at least we still have power in the household. You know, we can still dominate, you know, over women in the household and women in the workplace. And so, you know, the same ways that we have to unpack these things, we are asking, you know, white folks to unpack these things. We also have to continue to try to unpack all of these different power structures, where they stand. And so, yes, I think that it just stands to divide us up in by, you know, divide and rule, right? Divide and conquer, divide and rule is the plan. And so, you know, it allows the ruling class to maintain their power over us. And so, you know, just, you know, one last point I'll make to try to tie in, you know, a lot of what was said tonight. In the final point, you brought up the topic of black rage, you know, and I could speak to the job that I lost before the one that I spoke of, you know, and it was in an incident that was, you know, something that Angelique had brought up, with the idea of, you know, the constant, you know, the sort of little microaggressions, the constant, you know, every day that you have to live this thing, you have to see these things, and not being able to acknowledge these, you know, having, you know, white people come in and be put over you in the workplace, to be paid more than you. That was happening to me. I spoke out against it. What was really going on at the time was all the police brutality cases were in the news, and I started to call out because it was too much for me to deal with at the time. You know, it was one after the other. Breonna Taylor. It was, you know, it was Freddie Gray. It was you know, Laquan McDonald. It was, you know, Eric Garner. These were all happening one after the other, and all these news stories were out there. And when you get to the workplace and you're working around a lot of white liberals that think that they're, you know, they're allies, what they would do is they, you know, they look to me as the token blackie and expected me to then come in and be the voice of, you know, to speak for all black people, and they put that burden on you. And what it led to was, you know, we had a meeting. There was a white CEO that came in and tried to talk about, you know, try to give a talk on, you know, how people need to be, you know, communication in the workplace, and said that it was the responsibility of the subordinate, of the marginalized person, to speak up and to be more assertive, they said. And what I responded to that CEO, it was an investor of the startup, the tech startup. I'm a software engineer, and it was an investor in the tech startup. And, you know, in the tech industry, they're all, it's mostly liberals, it's Silicon Valley types, and they all are the type of people that will say that they are, you know, Black Lives Matter, all these sorts of things. But when push comes to shove, when it's about them having to give something up, is when you really see the lines drawn. As long as it doesn't affect them economically, they're more than willing to put up a banner or put up a sticker. But as soon as I started to talk about in the workplace, equal pay, you know, and how, you know, we had a power structure where it was all of our executives were white men, all of our sales team were white men, all of our engineers were white men except for myself, but all of them were men. Then the entire design team was white women, and then all of the customer success and customer service people were Latina women and Asian women. And so and you had the pay structure going from top to bottom. And when I finally brought that up, that was the point that they could not deal with Kamali speaking out for marginalized people anymore. As soon as I started to bring up in the context of economics and them having to give something up in order to actually establish an equality, all of a sudden they weren't so supportive of equality. And literally the week after that in the workplace, I was then fired in an incident where I demanded to be paid equal to the white person that was equally qualified as me, that had just been brought in over me in a job that I had built the technology that was there from the ground up. Somebody was coming in new out of the blue and with the same qualifications as me and same resume resume as me and was being put over me with a higher pay. And as soon as I spoke to the economics situation, that was when I was fired from my job. And I just want to say that, and this was again surrounding all that, I was asked to go in and could I speak to this, since I spoke up in that meeting? Could I then speak to this and provide them with some material that they could read? The CEO of the company asked me that. And when I started to give him, Malcolm X and these, and the real Martin Luther King, that's when they cut me off. And literally I was fired a week later after that incident, after I had, they called me all the police brutality cases that were going on. And I just want to say to something that Professor Zenkis said earlier about psychiatry and psychology. I see a psychiatrist, I see a therapist, and I've seen them for years now. And when I talk to them, I'm constantly frustrated because I suffer from ADHD. I used to be medicated for it, and ever since I had that mental health breakdown, I was diagnosed with what they call an adjustment disorder. Professor Zenkis and Kareem are probably familiar with the term. It means it's a situation where too many things happen at once, and they say you have a problem adjusting to it. And I had all of these, these traumatic things: losing my job, my dog, my housing, my partner of 14 years, all back to back. And after going into mental health care, doing all the right things, I then came out of that, and I still tried to do all the right things. And I began to see, and still to this day, I'm seeing a psychiatrist who is a substance abuse psychiatrist, because I wanted to make sure, is this something, am I doing something wrong? Am I misusing the Adderall? I was prescribed Adderall, and I was taking more Adderall because I was losing sleep, having to try to keep up at work, because even though I'm dealing with all of these traumas, I'm still expected to still be producing the same amount in the workplace as my white peers. Even though they're going home, they got comfortable housing, never had to deal with this shit a day in their life. I would come into work, and the thing that would piss me off was that somebody was just murdered, and we're just all going on like shit is just normal. Like I'm supposed, like nobody else, y'all didn't read that shit. Like somebody was killed in Pittsburgh. His name was Anthony Rose Jr. He was shot in the back after he just ran away. He was arrested. He was pulled over by cops because they suspected that the car that he was in was suspected in a robbery. He was pulled over. The kid turned around and ran away, and was shot in the back on camera. And he was actually featured in the video, in the political ad of somebody named John Fetterman in Pittsburgh, because the kid was known as such a good kid in the community. And this kid's name was Anthony Rose Jr. My name is Kamali Rose. I looked at this kid like he could have been my cousin, my little brother. Okay. And so you see these people, and you see them as yourself, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your mom, your dad. And so when you see them, their bodies dropping and no accountability, then you start to look around you and say, well, am I the only one seeing this shit going on? And so, you take that into the workplace, and again, you're still expected to keep up the same level of productivity as all the rest of your white peers, and other folks and other non-marginalized folks. And so, I needed this medication, and still to this day, it's been 2 years. And like I said, I was unemployed, and I was unemployed for 2 years, because I've not been given my medication again. And my doctor refuses to prescribe me the right medication. And I continue to say to her, listen, the problem is not internal anymore. All right. The problem isn't internal. Are you going to offer me a prescription for socialism? Because the fucking problem is capitalism. Okay. That's the problem that I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with all these power structures that are coming down on me and weighing down on me. And it's not internal. All right. But yes, I do need this medication to help me just keep up the pace that I need to in order to be able to maintain a job. All right. And because of that trauma, I literally could not work. I'm housing insecure. If I didn't have the friend that I had that's letting me stay, I stay right now with a friend, have been staying there for 2 years. If I didn't have that, I don't know, I'd probably be out on the streets right now. And so when you're dealing with all of that, those pressures, and you're one, slip up away from destitution, and you're being told by your psychiatrist, by your therapist that, okay, well, let's keep on unpacking and see what else. I've been on every kind of antidepressant, Prozac, Wellbutrin, what am I on now? Lexapro, they put me on every fucking antidepressant, and they literally, I tell them, it does not change a thing. I can take it, I could take as much as you give me. It doesn't change a damn thing about my existence. The problem is not internal, it's external. But a lot of these, you know, medical health professionals, they look at me, and I've had people, white, you know, comrades of mine that said, hey, and social, you know, social workers and people that are in the mental health profession that said, I went into my doctor, I went into my psychiatrist, I told them that I had this issue, and they prescribed me my medication, you know, and from that point forward, they've been able to be treated properly. But they look at us and they constantly, you know, and this is the type of, you know, medical, you know, racism that we face as well, where when you tell them about your own problems, they don't believe you. They don't think that somehow your intellect is always called into question. And it happened with my white coworkers as well. You know, your intellect, your ability to, you know, just because I may present as somehow like a neurotypical person in many ways, just because I happen to have, you know, slightly higher, IQ, you know, based on, again, very white supremacist structures that are in place that even determine what these, you know, what IQ or intelligence even is. But by white standards, I happen to be a little bit smarter. And so because of that, it's sort of, it's an overcompensation that happens. But still, and so when I describe my problems to them, it's still looked at as, okay, well, what's wrong with this guy as an individual, and not the fact of what the fuck is wrong with this entire system that puts all of this pressure and burden on Black, brown, marginalized people, women, trans people. And so, you know, I just have to say that.
No, absolutely, Kamali.
Black rage, and just the fact that what is viewed as Black rage is oftentimes Black pain, Black sadness, Black sorrow, Black disappointment, but it always is presented. I have people in the chat sometimes in my own stream say, whoa, Kamali, calm down. And I have to tell them, listen, this is just me just on a regular day trying to just, you know, exist. All right. And so what you may view as anger and rage is really just frustration and sadness and sorrow. And this is the only way that you can interpret.
It's the only way that we have to express it. So Kamali unpacked a lot. I'm using that same word. I'm using it. It's kind of lighten it up. But what he's describing is Black rage, or the causes of Black rage, or his Black rage. And it's not rage for the sake of rage. It's rage trying to cry out, trying to say I'm in pain, trying to say I'm hurt, I need help. That is, to me, what the rage is saying. But everybody, we have come to over our 2-hour mark. I'm going to give everybody a chance to chime in. That's what I was getting to. This is going to be your final time, is what I was trying to get to, Angelic. I'm going to let you go first, but I want to give everybody their final time to chime in on whatever topic. I have a feeling everybody's going to kind of comment on what Kamali was just speaking on, but I wanted to make sure you understood this is your final opportunity to comment, and that's what I wanted to say. So we'll go to Angelique, and then Anthony, and then Kareem. So Angelique, your final comments, if you want to comment on Kamala or any other thing that you missed, and then just tell us where maybe we can see you again. It might be on one of our shows, but just let us know that.
I just want to respond to Kamali, what he said. It's so great. I got so much out of what you said, Kamali. So much of it rang true with me. And I'll just say this. I don't know if it's a whole lot to end on, but I will say this is like what Kamali saying, all these pills and drugs. Do you have a pill for white supremacy? Do you have a pill for anti-Black racism? If you don't, then you're not solving the problem. And if we want to find a solution to this, the solution is in reparations to foundational Black Americans, the people who built this country, the people who are still being stolen from, all the wealth is being taken from us still to this day for centuries. And we are indigenous to this country. We are owed reparations. We are owed Black liberation as well. And we're owed anti-Black hate policies that benefit us. And that's where the solution is going to lie, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And where can some of our audience see you again? Are you going to be appearing anywhere soon, or are you just going to be appearing on our network again like the last time?
If you all will have me on your network again, then I will appear on your network. Otherwise, I'm not sure where else I will be appearing other than my real life.
Right.
I just want to say I'm excited to have, met at Kamali, Nick, Anthony. You all are all Twitter mutuals of mine. I'm so happy to talk to you all in person and meet you all in person. I'm very excited about that.
Absolutely.
And it's good to see you again, Jay.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I said Anthony. So Anthony, if you wanted to, final comments on anything, or if you wanted to talk, respond to what Kamali spoke about, and then just kind of tell us what you got coming up next before we sign off here.
Yeah, Kamali, that was intense. Thank you so much for sharing your truth. That's exactly the kind of thing they don't want you to do, right? Tell the truth. Why you're upset, why you have rage. It is completely appropriate. There is no mental deficit or illness in being rageful. It is appropriate. And then what Angelique just said, don't talk to me about a pill to fix my depression until you talk to me about a pill, I'm paraphrasing, not trying to put words in your mouth, to fix white supremacy. Because nobody talks about that. So, my fight in my field which is social work and mental health and community work, is to try to shed a light on this injustice, to call the bullshit out when I see it. It doesn't make me popular always with the powers that be, but it's amazing how much the students want to hear the truth. That's the thing. When I tell them what we call mental illness is often oppression, just coming out, it resonates with them. You know why? Because they live those lives. They've experienced it. And one thing I do think is insidious, and I just want to call it out, is, why the whole critical race theory discussion in the Virginia gubernatorial race. I think it serves a real nefarious purpose, and that is the Republicans can talk about this thing that isn't, as was pointed out, is not being taught to fifth graders, okay? And say it's terrible. And instead of the Democrats using a teachable moment and saying, let's talk about race and why this is important, they say, oh, no, we're not doing that. So that's the ratchet effect. Because the Republicans went even farther to the right and said something even more crazy. And instead of the Democrats standing their ground and saying, no, we're going to talk about racism and privilege and supremacy, they said, oh, no, we're not teaching it. So now we've closed off the possibility of having this very important, vital conversation. And I know why they're doing it. Because they're terrified. Because people don't want to work their shitty jobs anymore. Because people aren't voting for them anymore. They are terrified of consciousness spreading in this country, and especially terrified of consciousness spreading in the Black community, because whites know what we did to the Black and brown communities for centuries. We know it. We're not stupid. I hear the conversations. They're afraid. And good. It's time to make the comfortable uncomfortable. Where can you see me next? I'll be on Conrad Misty. I don't know the name of her podcast. I think it's just Conrad Misty and something, but talking about trauma and Julian Assange and how he's being treated and traumatized. And I'll be on the General Strike Summit. And there are so many great, I feel like, thanks for picking me, but I'm fine to be in that company. But I'll tell you, I was like, I don't know, like, wow, it's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to ride that. That's going to be an amazing few days there. And all the hard work that you're doing, putting this together, everybody, I am so grateful. I'm just showing up and I'm going to watch and I'm going to do my little thing. But thank you so much for doing the hard work. And you can visit me on Twitter and watch me get yelled at, because it's always fun. But I don't mind. And
yeah, you're great on Twitter. You're great. An awesome follow on Twitter. Absolutely. And let's go to Kareem. Kareem, your final thoughts, if you want to comment on what Kamali said, or if you had a comment about anything else, and then tell us what you got coming up next.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on your show, CJ. Always been a big fan, so very glad about that. Very cool to have met Kamali finally as well. Many powerful words. I wanted to jump in on that. And Anthony, also, man, if you ever want to discuss a bit on academic level, some collaboration or something, I think we have a lot in common. So feel free to hit me up sometime. That would be great. So yeah, it was nice meeting you all. Yeah, about what Kamali just said, and it's so important about how every day you're under so much racist stress. And I've just recently wrote a paper which is currently under review actually for a prestigious journal. So a lot of very famous white male professors will read it and hopefully they will accept it. But I actually make the same complaint as what Kamali just said. And that is that microaggressions that you would see in daily lives. You have a lot of professors in the psychological field who deny the existence of microaggressions, who actually say that you cannot prove it, so it doesn't exist. And I try to make a cultural psychological argument that it does exist because our cultural world creates that kind of behavior in people, and therefore it happens to us. So if that ever, if the paper gets published, I will definitely discuss it with you guys. And there's one more point that Kamali said is also very important, and that is that you feel bad because you're under continuous racial oppression. So what do? They put pills in your mouth and deal with your problem of oppression. You know, like or that a lot of people who are victims of discrimination also get cognitive training, okay, to change their way of thinking, because apparently it's your responsibility. You must cure your understanding of a racist world. Okay, so you get cognitive training to change your thinking process because you see and feel racism. Okay, so that's pathologizing a racist, your perception of a racist system, which is a very, very big problem also in the social sciences. And the final thing I would like to say is people who always talk about the race card, which is really, really sickening me. Okay, that people who say that, who are the people who say that? Who've never been racialized. If you don't want people to pull the race card, then ask yourself the question why your culture invented race in the first place. That's number one. First, your culture invents race to oppress people racially. And then you complain about the fact that people start mentioning it because they are observing their own oppression. Okay, so that is something I cannot stand when people talk about pulling the race card. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. And again, thank you all for the great conversation.
Absolutely, and that's actually, thank you for bringing that point up, because I heard the race card mentioned a couple of times, and I was going to make a point, but for whatever reason, I lost track of it. And that is something I do. It gets under my skin, the whole concept of a race card, because it implies you're using it and it's not racism going on. Like you're just using it to get something. Again, and black people say this to each other. Black people have said this in jokes and stuff like that. And I don't get the concept of the race card, and I don't understand why people, to me, that offends me more than the N-word. Now, I mean, that I might be different, but I'm just saying when people say the race card is so bizarre to me that you really think I'm using race. The question I would say is, do you think black people would take off their blackness in order not to be lynched? Do you think that would happen? We would. In order for us not to be lynched, in order for our family not to be sold off. This is not a card. This is our life, our existence. So that's why it greatly offends me when people use that term. But let's go to Nick, and then Kamali. Will give Nick a chance. What do you have coming up? I know you got a lot coming up all of us have a lot coming up. And go ahead.
This is the Jones Strike Summit Hype Week. So
yes,
make sure you share with your friends. We got so many great guests. It's gonna be a great it's a 3-day pro labor event. No International Leftist Coalition tomorrow, but I think we had a great conversation, which we always try to do at Friend and Leftist. One thing I want to add on to this, regarding to what Angelique said, and why people don't want to talk about critical race theory. Because if people actually understood critical race theory, understand how structures still impact Black Americans to this day, they will agree with her statement that we need reparations and we need it now.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that a lot of white Americans do, and I even seen people who consider themselves left of center, they will say, why should we pay reparations to people? You're not a slave. Hell, your dad was even a slave. Now, once again, if you knew critical race theory and understood how the structures of capitalism in our prison industrial complex stolen generational wealth from us, and how we still are the racial wealth gap right now is worse than it was at the height of the civil rights era in the 1960s. So if you understand the basics of critical race theory, you wouldn't even make a statement that ridiculous. But people know that. That's why they want to suppress that information. The last thing, now I want to hit to what Kamali said. This is the last point I want to make because I think it's super important. Me and CJ talk about it a lot. And this is the concept of Black rage and why I go against civility politics, right? And there's a strong desire among the bourgeoisie to have a cleaned up professional person that talk about politics in a neutral point of view. And you see this a lot of big channels. They pride themselves on their ability just to say how it is, neutrality. And I am 100% clear, guys, 100% transparency. You are not getting neutrality here. I'm telling you guys exactly my bias. I am advocating for my community first and foremost. And when you live the trauma of what me and CJ talk about, the point of me showing rage, the point of CJ showing rage is to let people know that this emotionally impacts us, and this is the rage that is needed when discussing this story. Do you guys understand why news anchors sound neutral? That was a purpose. That was designed by the capitalist class, so you won't have that emotional reaction to these negative stories they are talking about. So they won't have an indictment on the capitalist class. So it serves the left no benefit to have, oh my God, I'm gonna button up my shirt. I'm gonna tell the news in a neutral point of view. No, we need that rage because this stuff is actually affecting real life. And and another point, and whenever Black leftists or whenever any disenfranchised community brings up the big elephant in the room that a lot of people don't want to talk about, we are called divisive. This is why Kamali would consider divisive because he was standing up for disenfranchised community in himself in his workplace. And a lot of people are upset. You see the bourgeoisie boutique left, the people who may not like Fred Hampton leftists. And I'm telling you guys right now, and I told CJ and anyone from Fred Hampton leftists can attest to this. I told them this when we started that this was going to happen. Did I, CJ? I told them if we ever got people watching us, we will get a backlash from the boutique left. And I can tell you why I knew that was coming. Because the white savior complex cannot stand the idea that you have young Black leftists that are starting a network and speaking for themselves instead of listening to what like TYT had to say, instead of Majority Report, instead of following just the Democrats. It's actually Black people paving their own path. And we said, fuck your electoral game. And that's why a lot of people don't like that. They are intimidated by that. But anyway, that's why it ends today. Classes, race, and throughout the course of this 2.5 hours live stream, you guys will understand that now. So I'm gonna have Zinkus. I'm gonna talk to Zinkus one-on-one. Like, I'm gonna have him back on for Hand the Leftist.
Yeah.
You guys are gonna see Kareem along International Leftist Coalition. Angela, we're gonna see her a lot on the Friend Network. It was a great show. Thank you guys for watching.
Yes, 1 second. I thought this was a funny comment. Yeah, when I saw her name Kareem, I was like, "Wow, never seen a person with the name Kareem that looked like you," which is amazing and it's eye opening. So I just thought that was a funny comment. I'm hoping the person meant it as a joke.
I'm half white. My mom is white. My dad is an Arab. So
okay, then that makes sense. Okay, so Kamali, I know you kind of started this off, but if you did have any final thing that you wanted to kind of say before I hit in broadcast here.
One, I'm sure, I speak for, everyone else, I feel comfortable speaking for everyone else when I said we would love to have Angelique come on for the General Strike Summit. We'll definitely reach out and see about getting you on a panel on there. I would love to have her on again. Yes. And then I've said enough today in my own words. So I'll just end with a quote from Malcolm X. It's really a quote from Cornel West in his book, his most recent book, Black Prophetic Fire, but he's quoting Malcolm X. And he says, and this this is to speak to the point of Black rage. He says, Malcolm would say over and over again, you are not going to get something detached and disinterested from anybody who is sitting on the stove and the stove is burning their behind. No, they're going to holler out. They're going to respond deeply and viscerally. He never forgot the Black folk on the stove. He never forgot the prison system, Black folk on the stove, massive unemployment, Black folk on the stove, indecent housing, Black folk on the stove, inadequate health care, Black folk on the stove. And from the very beginning, from slavery to Jim Crow, so that sense of catastrophe, the sense of emergency, the sense of urgency, the sense of needing to get it out, to cry out, to shout, somehow allowed that fire inside of his bones to be expressed with power and with vision. He never lost that. He never, ever lost that.
That is excellent.
Well
That is excellent. I mean, I can't top that. But what I will say is the General Strike Summit, November 12th through the 14th. We're streaming live on this network, 10 a.m. Eastern till 10 p.m. Eastern. A lot of the same faces, I believe, all of the faces here you will be seeing at the General Strike Summit. And all the General Strike Summit is, it's not a general strike. It's a summit of people coming together to have conversations on how to build this labor movement, how to build the structure that's required to have a successful long-term general strike. And that is the whole point. So I want to thank the panel for being here. Of course, this topic needs 3 times the amount of time to even delve into what we need to.
I just want to say one thing. Go
ahead.
I just want to let everyone know we are launching a new Ko-fi page.
Okay.
So if you support via Ko-fi, you just go over to Patreon as well if you want to show support for Friend and Leftist. So support the Patreon. Don't worry about the Ko-fi. But we'll talk about that more in detail later. But
so good point. Yeah, so Ko-fi, you see it down there scrolling, but support us on Patreon because we're transitioning our Ko-fi. That is a great point, and we'll get that out of that scrolling bar. Thanks again for joining us. Professor Anthony and Kareem, you will be on many shows with me together in the future, and I'm sure with Nick and Kamali. And it sounds like Angelique is going to be, we're going to drag you aboard this also. So thanks for everybody being here. I'm signing off now. Thanks for everybody. Oh, thanks for everybody watching on Rockfin. Thanks for everybody who donated on Rockfin. Thank you for all your donations. Thank you for all of your super chats. Signing off, everybody.